I'm real happy to be hosting this event, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's faculty again for the benefit of those of you who may not have been on last week's webinar. Janet Peters is the project coordinator of accessible technology for the Great Lakes ADA Center. She has 18 years of experience with assistive and accessible technologies for individuals with disabilities and has worked with a wide range of stakeholders to promote full and unrestricted participation in society for all of them. Excuse me. Bryan Ayres is the director of the Technology and Curriculum Access Center at Easter Seals, Arkansas. His center collaborates with the Arkansas Region 6 ADA Center that serves Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And his background is in special education with an emphasis in severe disabilities and applied behavior analysis. I've had the pleasure of working with both Janet and Bryan over quite a few years now, and through several regional and federal initiatives. Most recently, the early development of the QIAT-PS project, Quality Indicators and Assistive Technology Post-Secondary, which has evolved as they have continued it into the tools and strategies that they presented last week, and that has been the focus of the discussion during the week. And that brings us to today's webinar, where they will be taking a look at those discussion topics, commenting somewhat on them for us, and giving us some further information to wrap the week up in terms of a whole array of tools that can be used to make sure that technology has its proper place and is considered in the transition process to post-secondary. And they'll be sharing a lot of those with you today. So Janet and Bryan, thanks for being with us again today, and I guess we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Russ, and hello to everyone who made it onto the webinar today. And just if you didn't participate in the first webinar, part one of this topic, that is recorded on the CTD site, as well as you can review the discussion that took place this week. In this webinar today, part two, we are going to review the questions from our discussion and offer some additional resources that we think are particularly helpful to this topic in remembering assistive technology in the transition process. So last week we talked about the project Bryan and I coordinate called the QIAT-PS, and this week we're going to talk about some additional resources for this topic. So one of our first questions from the discussion forum was, what does it take for an IEP team and student who uses or needs assistive technology to mutually assess the student's capacity and exchange ideas? This is something that is very important. As we discussed in the presentation last Monday, having the student involved to the greatest extent possible in the IEP process is really important for self-determination, but also critical for those assistive technology decision-making skills. It helps if the student is involved in that assistive technology process. It helps to avoid AT abandonment, which of course no school district wants to purchase assistive technology and have it not used or underutilized. As well as it's really critical for successful transition of that AT, be it requesting a new accommodation in a post-secondary environment, or if it's taking that actual assistive technology through a voc rehab program or other kinds of transition buyout options. Understanding that critical issue that the student really needs to be the driver and in the leading role with that is key. And there are a lot of resources to help with that. So we did talk about the QIAT-PS. A couple of other resources that we highlighted in the discussion from last week are ones that I use frequently when working on this, on the transition of assistive technology. So the first one is a program, a student manual called Hey, Can I Try That? It is a student handbook for choosing and using assistive technology. It's free. You can download the PDF for free. The book is written for students, directly for students to take the lead in their IEP around the area of assistive technology, both for considering it and for evaluating it and being really a key part of that process. The manual itself really builds on self-determination skills. This is a manual from the Educational Tech Points from Gail Bowser and Penny Reed, and it really fits nicely with the other self-determination skills that are already being addressed in the transition process, and as a student writes their goals and works towards them. The manual itself has 6 guided forms. The forms are ones such as the one you see up here is just a small snapshot of one of the forms, but you get the idea that it is for the student to fill out of like what's the problem, describing the assistive technology in their own words, the environment, the situation, how they would use the assistive technology, all the way through the process to how is my assistive technology working for me. So it's a really easy to use forms that can be incorporated into the IEP process to really give a student that language and ability to be part of and hopefully lead that assistive technology discussions in the IEP process. As I mentioned, it is free of charge. It also has, within the manual and the forms, it has stories and guidance after each form. So when you decide what the problem is, then it says this is how you can frame this as accommodation language. So it's a really useful tool that will help with, getting students involved in that IEP process. Another one that I use frequently is the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative. They have a manual for assessing student needs for assistive technology. This manual includes many forms so that the student can highlight their strengths and be part of that process in the IEP in a positive way. It's a little bit outdated. It hasn't been updated since 2009, but it is, I find it still a valuable resource for selecting the assistive technology and in trying to pull that student into the best into the process, and it also uses well-established best practices for selecting and implementing assistive technology. The Great Lakes ADA Center, Wisconsin is one of my states, which is why I kind of have resources from my region, but wherever you're from, as this is a national webinar, I would check with your state Department of Education. Many states produce their own specific assistive technology manual for the process, and your Department of Ed probably has the current guidelines and recommended practice for your state. So I would start with your state, but if not, WADI is a really good resource that's, again, free for you to go use and download. And another resource that we mentioned in the discussion for this question was video modeling, mostly as a way for a student to practice those soft skills that are helpful for them to be able to articulate their goals and desires within that IEP team. A couple of good tools, these are commercial products. Our Model Me Kids has some good video modeling for social skills, and if you've heard of Attainment, Attainment has several tools and DVDs that use video modeling as part of the transition process. So these aren't specific to assistive technology, but they will help a student develop those skills so they can talk about the assistive technology pieces that we've identified in the IEP process. Of course, you can do your own video modeling and use free scripts that are on the internet and use mobile technology such as an iPad or an iPhone, and that's perfectly acceptable too. So the idea is to develop those skills so that the student can work within that IEP team as part of the process. The next question from our discussion was about how students can build a network of support around assistive technology. One way that is really important is to have students and actually professionals that work in the field of assistive technology to connect with others who also use assistive technology. That helps build a professional learning community and share experiences and tech tips and encouragement when that happens. And not to derail us, but I am going to highlight a different project that I work on that tries to attempt to build a network for young adults with disabilities. This is a project I coordinate. It is sponsored by the Great Lakes ADA Center. It's a closed social network to support young adults with disabilities who use assistive technology and are searching for employment. It's called punchin.org. It is a website, a closed, when I say social network, so you can think of like Facebook, but you have to be invited to be a member of this. So it works very similar to Facebook in that there's resources like a website, but there's also groups and forums that people can interact with each other on. We do offer an employment course that's a pilot course right now where students will go through an online moderated course through their groups. So you can see the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, for example, is offering it as a course through their Disability Service Office, a joint project with their career services. So those students are in a closed course within this network. The students, the pilot project for the course has 5 content modules plus an introduction and a conclusion. The module courses are some employment-related information, such as discover yourself, so finding out, how you begin your job search and focusing your strengths and matching them to your career. We have some tools that help examine that. We have a Get Prepared module that offers those first foundational steps, such as work readiness, work ethic, leadership, and then into practical skills like writing your resume, practicing an interview, how to fill out an application. Finding a job is really about networking, so the whole Punch-In network is to allow students to talk about, say, their assistive technology use, their employment experience, and build a social network that they can use for references and for job tips, and just like all of us network professionally. So it's really doing a virtual network, trying to create a virtual network for young adults. There are 2 modules that are disability specific. So we have a module on Know Your Rights, an introduction to the Americans with Disabilities Act, so students can understand their rights and responsibilities as the law changes when they graduate out of high school and go into the adult world. And then because we think assistive technology is really critical in many cases for young adults, we have a section on use technology and how to do the things we talked about within that first webinar in our discussion of assistive technology skills. So we have a section on assistive technology. Each of the courses each module is set up the same. So they all have a video lecture to watch, articles to read, and then a do section where they will do things like write a resume or conduct an interview with the online moderator, or some assignment that is due within that module. Every module also has a discussion. I took a screenshot here of some of the discussions we have. and that is to get feedback from the course moderator, as well as, again, so these young adults can network with each other and build, relationships that way. So the discussions are part of the course, but also a way for individuals to virtually have conversations with each other. There is a quiz at the end of each module that you have to pass to move on to the next module. As I said, we are doing pilot projects with this right now. So if that is something that you are interested in your group doing, I can have a conversation with you. You can email me or call me at a separate time, and we can see if that might be a good match for your group. But in light of this webinar, the reason that one of the goals that we're trying to do with the Punch-In project is exactly what that question asks of how can a student build their network, both for employment but also for assistive technology support. And part of that is being really deliberate about building the network and building up people that they can interact with after high school and get that support. And then I will turn it over to Bryan to talk about our other discussion forum questions. Here you go, Bryan.
Thanks, Janet. Hi, everybody. The discussions took some interesting turns this week. The third question that we had posted was, what are some strategies or techniques that can be used to teach good habits in order to improve and sustain AT use? So there's kind of two pieces to this. There is the teacher piece of this, that is strategies or techniques to use with the students, whether it be presented in a applied kind of a format, or whether it's kind of in a self-study type of approach, or looking at different kinds of forums like Punched-In or another kind of a forum where somebody has learned some habits from a coach or something like that. The other piece of the definition here, of the question here, was to improve and sustain AT use. And, you can always make a good match sometimes with a good assessment, but, that's just a little bitty piece of the puzzle. And, if you follow the quality indicators at K-12 for assistive technology, the QIAT.org listserv or work group, if you will, you know that the match is feature matching and picking a piece of the technology. That's just kind of the start. There's lots of other pieces that need to go into this. So anyway, we've got two pieces here, one that deal with teachers and therapists and parents, and the other one with the AT user. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go ahead and talk about this just a second. There are a couple of things that Janet and I mentioned in our training on Monday a week ago. One of the kind of the trio of skills that a person needs. One of them is to really, really understand and use your devices independently as possible. So this first bullet, care and use of the device or devices that a person might have, becomes pretty critical piece. And so that's something that we want to make sure that we think about. For each individual too, identifying the resources that they have available to them are pretty important. For vendor or device-specific kinds of resources, that may mean someone that is housed in your state, or it may be that's close by that you can see or talk to or interact with via the internet in a fairly quick manner, or it may be a situation where you're going to have to chat with somebody through the internet or talk to a mentor, that's not a lifetime discussion. So for every person in every place and every circumstance, it's going to look a little different. This is one of the reasons that we think it's real important that we ask that people who are teaching high school that have assistive technology users as part of their their classes or their support network is that they really make sure that as these students range from age 14 to graduation, that we really are moving towards independence here, that we're looking at these specific resources that would make sure that they have as much independence on their device or devices as practically possible. The second piece of this is resources that might be environmental or might be task specific. For instance, I traveled with several consultants over the last few years who had service animals, and task-specific training, particular airports, particular transportation systems. Those were kinds of resources that depended on the environment where you were at. And certainly somebody's going to have to be able to have some pretty sophisticated skills to understand the nuances of those different environments. So being cognizant of those resources is really important, and being able to recall them and access them quickly is going to really help make sure that the AT use is not troubled and it's more independent. The third piece of identifying the resources that we sort of referred to in this question was troubleshooting and problem solving needs to be addressed constantly through simulation, through video modeling, through mentoring, through case study. Those are perfect opportunities to practice this, and there will be trouble, and there will be opportunities for problem solving. So making sure that there's plenty of that, and it's strategically planned. So it's not just that we're doing this incidentally, that we're strategically planning troubleshooting and problem solving opportunities. It's better to do that when you've got some kind of control than to face this in a situation where you need your AT to work and you don't have your resources at hand. And then finally, looking at the resources, those people who seem to be successful AT users on our higher education campuses identified backup plans. Many times in their narratives in our surveys, they were able to give us some kind of an idea about technology that would solve it or a non-technology kind of a mechanism. And so these are pretty important. So being able to quickly and efficiently access these 4 points become pretty important. The next bullet that I'd like to talk about is if you haven't done it yet, do take a chance to go to the QIAT-PS.org website and do a self-assessment or just try the self-assessment, and take a look and go ahead and give it some scores if you have a student to use it with, or you know of someone. Go ahead and do a self-assessment or a independent assessment, if you will, through that, and then think about some of the areas that you might target that are lower. In a couple of our examples from the first webinar, we looked at one young lady who was approaching graduation in college and was pretty good in the area of care and use of her device, but really around the self-awareness and self-advocacy, she was not as confident. Well, this would factor into how well she did in college and potentially the workplace, and also how well she could problem solve and form that team around her quickly. So do go ahead and take a try with it, and just think about through some of the targets that might need improvements. The next piece that I want you to think about in teaching good habits for assistive technology use are associated with AT and AT policy and practices in the K-12 setting. Russ and Janet and I have had the opportunity the last 4 or 5 years to present at the Association of Higher Education and Disability international conferences held around the country in the summer. What we constantly hear from the higher ed disability service offices and student service offices and whatever else they might call their different disability support services is that that there are students that are transitioning from K-12 that come to them with some pretty good device skills, but as far as independence or as far as being exposed to what might be available academically, they really are starting from scratch and having to go really on the fast track. So take a look and a thoughtful look at the AT policy practices in your local K-12 settings. One of the things that I strongly believe in is that if you build local AT capacity in K-12, you're going to have a better better outcome, and certainly the outcomes in the higher education setting and the carryover as far as either personally owned assistive technologies or assistive technologies that might come to campus or be accessed through rehab or other mechanisms are going to be better used. So do kind of think about that. If you're not exactly sure where to get started, I'd like to suggest 2 resources. If you're not a member of the QIAT consortium or the QIAT listserv, visit the QIAT, QIAT.org website. And you certainly can join the listserv, and it's got quite a lot of good information on the K-12 environments, and they've been very cooperative with us on the QIAT-PS project. And then another one that I'd like to recommend is at the University of South Carolina, and this is a coursework that they put together in South Carolina under their Tech Act related program, but it's integrating technology or integrating assistive technology into curriculum, and has several modules and really talks about building the capacity at K-12, which will just improve our results as we go towards the higher ed setting. There's a few others that I'd like to just kind of recommend. I noticed in some of our discussions that many of you have had experience with the Catalyst projects through RESNA and the webinars and things that they put on. I would recommend to you the landing page for the RESNA project. Has all the links to all the state Tech Act programs and international assistive technology resources as well. And so it's a very good connection for understanding what's available statewide in your area and locally, and also nationally and internationally. Another one that I want to recommend to you as a resource is an article from Edutopia. I don't know if many of you use it. Like Janet, I'm also a big fan of the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative, and we recommend ASNAT many times here in Arkansas. So you don't have to be in the upper Midwest to recommend this. We also are big fans of Edutopia, and this article came from the 2013-2014 year, but it has a really nice comprehensive resource list with links to teachers, teacher tools, and user tools for assistive technology. And then finally on this question, or this particular discussion thread, I just did want to recommend that those of you that are in K-12 that are with us today or maybe dropping in later on, do take a look at the Association on Higher Education and Disability. Their pages for special interest groups are in enlightening about what expectations different universities have, what policies they have. As you know, with our civil rights legislation, such as the ADA and Section 504, there's a wider variation than what you would see in K-12 of the way different universities and colleges structure their support programs. So, and they do have many ideas on best practice at the AHEAD site. So do give that a look if you're not on there now. Certainly, if you're in higher education and you are interested in the students that are attending that have assistive technology, you probably already have gone to the AHEAD website. But it's been very useful to us. Another question that we had in our discussion forum was probably one that I wrote, and I apologize right up front here or right at the tail end of this. I think it's a little bit confusing, but let me kind of talk a little bit about what it said and then what it meant. This was imposed collaboration does not work well in the adult world. I don't know if you've ever been forced to work in a work group where there was a lot of incompatibility and several people who didn't want to share the load and those kinds of things. You know, that can be challenging. And you know, what we would like for our assistive technology users is that they be as independent as possible and understand that they're going to have some challenging teams. They're going to have to advocate for themselves in situations where it may not be easy and there may not be those kinds of things. So as I've said on this slide, it's probably poorly worded, but what we really mean here is how can you teach someone for effective collaboration? You know, we don't always get to choose who we collaborate with, and so our soft skills, if you will, or those skills that we use to interact with people, have to be pretty sophisticated. So that discussion question probably could go on for a year or better. You know, think a little bit about factors influencing collaboration. You know, teachers, if teachers are expecting students to work together in groups without teaching and modeling those skills, you know, that's probably going to be less than adequate unless there's real good leadership in the student teams. So what we're going to suggest to you, and what has been suggested in learninghand.com and other sources, is that some of these soft skills don't need to be just incidentally you know, talked about with students. They need to be actively addressed. And as you can see, they include common sense things that we all struggle as adults to work on: active listening and respect, manners, keeping our attitudes positive, focused, and being aware of social and cultural kinds of issues, and timing, and all those kinds of things that are fairly subtle, but can be really the thing that makes something work for you or doesn't. So how can we address those? How can we help people become more efficient and better at that particular area? One of the things that I'd suggest to you is that this is fertile ground to practice collaboration in the assistive technology problem-solving process. And you may have a model that differs from this. Many of them are similar, and we can find, you know, dozens and dozens of resources across the United States alone with different methods or structures that you could look at for the problem-solving process. But collaboration works well within this framework, and most if not all of them start with a definition of the situation or the problem and analysis, and setting up, either if you come to the situation with an AT device or system, that you you reconsider what you've got and how it's working and difficulties that you're having. And if you don't, then you start in with that whole idea of looking at the student, or the person, and looking at what kind of tasks they might have to address, so on and so forth, environments that they're looking at, those kinds of things. After you have given those three things, goal setting, planning and implementing intervening, evaluating, and then, planning how you're going to address strengths or weaknesses in your goals from your evaluation, really are present. These pieces, maybe not in that order with that kind of bullet emphasis, but collaboration is an ongoing process, and we stress this the first time around. A one-time shot just doesn't get it, and that's been clear for many years that that sometimes is the reason that we have device abandonment. That we left out a piece thinking about the person first, or we left out some of the environmental factors, or that we didn't come back and reevaluate often enough. So it's important to remember that the problem-solving process, if we're going to develop that, we need to practice it. So, having said that, I think what we would like to do, we're just a little bit earlier, and we didn't take any jaunts out to try to share our screens today. And I think what we would like to do this week is to entertain questions. And Russ and Janet and I are unmuted, and we can take these over the chat thing. We still have quite a few people with us. So these could be questions, or they could be comments if you would like to think about the next step for CTD on transition issues. There's another place that we should go with this, so we welcome that kind of input too. So having said that, does anybody have any questions?
It would also be helpful if you have a favorite transition resource that you think would be useful to the group. You can share that as well.
Bryan or Janet, this is Russ. I was wondering if you might want to talk just a little bit about QIAT-PS and future initiatives. We focused primarily on the student tool this time around, and I know that you had some plans for the next year that possibly some of our participants today might have some involvement with in terms of the continued evolution of the QIAT-PS tools.
Good point, Russ. Janet, you want me to start out?
Sure.
Okay. Well, what we are looking at is we are looking at doing some experience with the student tool, the tool on our QIAT-PS website. The current analysis that's going on has been mainly focused on, although a lot of people have used the student self-evaluation matrix or self-assessment matrix, the validation study and the surveys have mainly been focused on users of from the Disability Services offices using the campus tool. So what we're proposing is that we start getting, at the very least, some anecdotal feedback on the student self-evaluation matrix, and looking at some ideas and potential uses, if people would like to consider putting it into formats for their curriculum and transition that they're already doing, or if you're a therapist and you can see an application for this through your therapy and more independence and sort of helping with the self-determination effort, we would be curious how that works for you too. So those are just some ideas. Janet, go ahead and expand if you'd like.
Yeah, so we, in the first webinar, we talked about how we are doing a pilot project right now with campuses to test our campus self-evaluation matrix as part of the QIAT-PS project. And then, as Russ noted, we've highlighted the student tool. We need to work further on the student tool, and probably this is our first putting our toes into the water to see, to get some feedback on that, and we'll do a more formal process with that. And then, of course, as Bryan mentioned, we have different audiences, such as voc rehab, that we would like to expand, you know, this to as well. So we have lots of places we'd like to go, and if it is, as we talked about in the first webinar, a very collaborative project. So if anything about the QIAT-PS, either the campus piece or the student self-evaluation matrix is of particular interest to you, we are looking for partners and collaborators. So be part of us.
Yeah, I would also just kind of add to that, if you're not sure about exactly how you would want to use it, and you need some guidance in how to use the self-evaluation matrix. There's not one for the student self-evaluation matrix yet, but it's in development. But we have Gail Bowser, the former director of the Oregon Assistive Technology Program, and one of the founders of the QIAT leadership team for the QIAT.org K-12 collaborative, helped us with some how-to kinds of things with some of our partners from higher ed. So you're certainly welcome to use those resources in the tool sections as well on the website. Jody, you can certainly use the student self-evaluation matrix, and that's what we've talked about. And you are absolutely right. You can look at that, but you can also take a look at the, I find, even though I'm a K-12 teacher by trade, in one of my lives, I find it very informative to kind of look at expectations that assistive technology users and people in the disability services communities at higher ed have thought in the campus matrix too. So I kind of think they both have value.
While we're waiting to see if anyone has any other questions, Bryan, maybe put up the next slide so that folks could jot down, if they want to participate, they could jot down, oh, there it is, your or Janet's contact information, and kind of be able to stay in touch that way. If anyone who is online would like to, we do have everyone's email address. I don't want to inundate people, but if anyone would like to indicate in the chat area that they'd kind of like further information on, that isn't in the slideshow here, but further information in the QIAT-PS project as it evolves, just put your name, into the chat area and say you would be interested in staying in touch with it, and we'll collect those addresses so that the project has them available, Bryan.
Absolutely, Russ. Thanks.
And don't hope everybody noticed Janet's comment that the QIAT-PS.org project has its own list. so that you could connect for that, and you can do that on the website. Is that correct?
Yep, you can sign up on the website, and as you said, Russ, if you share the emails with us, we'll add them to that list. We don't, it's not a inundated listserv, so you're not going to get a lot of emails, but when there's a new, either a new tool or say our survey results are final, we will send out an announcement on that list.
Okay, thanks. And Jody has a question for you guys.
Well, I'll go ahead. Jody, the student tool, if you're planning on using that, or if you've already used it with your student, I think that would be a good place to start. And it sounds like you're thinking about disclosure law and AT laws for college. Probably if it sounds like your student is really close to graduation and getting going shopping. So that's what I would recommend, that if they're able and have the access, I would say it's time to start looking at start looking at interests that they may have and where they'd like to go to school, and start visiting their websites or taking some of those college visits. That's always important. In all our states, it seems like somebody is doing some kind of a pre-college experience on the campus during the summers. We're seeing a lot of that, similar to what Do It did in Washington a few years back, and have established pretty well. There's a lot of those kinds of things going on now. So anyway, that would be a good way to get started. Janet, you want to chime in on that?
Yes, I think the student tool is what you should be using with your daughter, which I think is great. And then some of the things that Bryan said in the webinars of taking those very intentional steps to practice those skills and tour the colleges to look at. Yep, sounds like you're doing everything right, Jody, of getting the assistive technology in line and making sure she's on her way. They're doing the college tours is really important to talk with the Disability Service Office and just ask them specifically of what assistive technology they offer, what skills they have, what your daughter is using. Those conversations will be very enlightening on which school is going to be the best environment for her.
Building on that, it occurs to me that any parent, family, student getting ready to go to interview colleges and the Office for Students with Disabilities might be well served to read through the matrices that have been developed for the institutions, for the colleges. That gives you an idea of the questions that the schools using the tool are asking themselves. And if you were interviewing a school that does not have any familiarity with the QIAT-PS project, they might also be very close to the list of questions that you might want to ask the school in helping to determine what would be the best environment for you.
Now, we've said this once or twice, I think, throughout the week, but there's great variability in the extent of the supports that are available in some campuses, and it's not really, you can't judge by size, because some of the smallest universities have very vibrant and robust programs for disability support. So understanding, their perspective and their philosophy and their relationship with the campus and, campus culture is important to get kind of gauge too. So anyway, that's another reason to kind of take a look at the campus tool as well. Janet, I don't know if we have time. Would you want to say a little bit about the approach that one of like Augsburg College used in looking at their services?
Well, Yeah, so we are doing the pilot with campuses, and they have given us some good feedback on the way the student self-evaluation matrix came about is, feedback that we want the students to come in at college with some of these skills already in hand, and that meaning not that they don't provide the assistive technology, but students having a better understanding of that. And so one thing we are looking at, as we mentioned, of really taking a deeper look at our student self-evaluation matrix, and colleges such as Augsburg is a good example of a local college here in Minneapolis where we did, that was part of the pilot project, is using that as in their orientation process with their students to help the students sort of self-evaluate where they're at with their skills. And I will mention that the Punch-In project uses in their assistive technology module uses an activity that's an adaptation, again, of the student self-evaluation matrix. So we're really making these students, we really want ownership, students to take ownership over their assistive technology and kind of be able to evaluate their own skills with it and where they need to improve and where they need to reach out for help. So it's a theme running through all of our resources.
One of the things
reaching out to the help, like Bryan had mentioned earlier, the ability to drive the process of reaching out for help, rather than we're kind of used to in K-12 waiting for the system to come and figure out what it is you need and give it to you. The big difference that I've noticed in talking mostly with the community college folks in New York is that they don't have the bandwidth for that, but they can indeed, and are excited about helping students that come to them and say, this is what I have and this is what I need. Can you give me a hand?
Well, one thing
Bryan,
too, Russ. No, that's okay. One thing I just wanted to mention is that many universities around the country are working on projects to include students with intellectual disabilities on the college campus of all types. I mean, not all of them are. Some are partnerships with other agencies, and some are internal to the college or university. So they're looking at not only, that all levels of participation in some of those. And I just refer you to thinkcollege.net if you're not familiar with it. It's just a national network of different colleges who are using the resources from the Higher Ed Act to plan programs for potential participation on the campus. So there are a range of options. Still, regardless, need to have the competencies strategically addressed. So that might be another workshop for CTD down the road.
Jackie, before we go, I wanted to just check with you and see if there was an evaluation that we wanted to ask the participants to fill out before we disconnect from them while we're waiting to see if there are any more questions that come up.
The link for the evaluation is in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Nolan. To direct everyone's attention to that, if you can take just a few minutes, we're always looking to improve the events, whether your comments are on the timing of it, the time of day, content, topics you'd like to see pursued. Please take a look at that link and go, when we're finished here, go to that link that Nolan put up and give us your feedback. Nolan, do you see that Jody's comment?
It says, oh, bananas? I'm not sure what that means. We can't find the page you requested. Oh, all right, let's try this again. My apologies.
Oh, Nolan's working on that for us. We got time for just another question or comment or two.
Well, I was able to follow the link just now, so it worked for me.
Okay.
Okay.
It might be splitting it because it goes over 2 lines, because it worked for me, but I selected the whole link.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I'm going to post it again just in case, but yeah.
If clicking on the link doesn't work, select the whole thing and paste it into a browser.
Then paste it, yeah, into the, yeah, because when I paste it into the browser, it works fine.
Okay, great. Well, barring any other questions, we don't need to keep everybody the last 4 minutes. Thanks to Nolan for managing the technology for us today, and certainly to Janet and Bryan for sharing the resources with us over the last week. We hope that you folks will stay in touch, join one of the lists that have been put up there so that you stay connected to these resources as they continue to develop. And thank Janet and Bryan, and thank all of you for your time for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for your attention, everyone.